Red Dead Redemption is one of my favorite games of all time. Top 5 for sure, used to be top 3, but then I played New Vegas. Nowadays it's been overshadowed by its prequel and questionable business practices. The first point with good reason is RDR2 is one of those games that words just can't live up to. But wanna know something that it didn't do better than the first one? The ambience and world. Saying it like that is slightly disingenuous, because these two games, despite both being westerns, don't have the same setting or context. Let me explain. One could say that RDR2 is like Django Unchained, cinematic and diverse in its setting. RDR1 is more like the Wild Bunch or the Dollar Trilogy, surrounded by desert and muted colors that visually feel more in line with what you'd expect from a western. Red Dead Redemption opens not with the sound of a harmonica or the sight of a desert, but rather with the melody of a piano and the view of an industrialized town and a ferry. The iconography of a new century. I know you've heard all about this before, but it truly is a masterclass in both storytelling and world building. It's only when John Marston appears on screen that the harmonica hits, and we see the contrast between these two suited government men and a gunslinger. A contrast that sets the main theme for the story, but more importantly in the case of this video, sets the tone of the world. This is later reinforced when John arrives to New Austin. The game creates a strange contrast between making the world feel bleak and alive at the same time. We understand the West is dying, it's overcome by gangs, hardship, and has little compared to the more developed East we saw in the very first scene. It's a different kind of Western. Not about the height of the Wild West, but about its end. And even with that, boy does it feel and sound like the Wild West. Rockstar's latest title before this, GTA 4, didn't have mission soundtracks, and it grounded you in Nico Bellic's world, one far darker than CJ or Tommy's. RDR1 grounds you in its world with a different approach, with a dynamic soundtrack that changes depending on what you're doing, if you're in a gunfight, if you're in a saloon, or just walking around, with instruments that pay homage to classic spaghetti western soundtracks. Cutscenes, on the other hand, are quieter. They immerse you in the sound of the world and the feel of the performances. It lets the time period sink in. There's no doubt that RDR2's character depth is unparalleled, but RDR1's simpler and more stereotypical approach to the characters also helps the atmosphere the game is trying to build. Come on, the town sheriff, the drunk, the tonic salesman, do I have to go on? I used to feel different about this. The characters reminded me of a criticism Watch Dogs 2 used to have, which is that you were fraternizing not so much with a person, but with personalities. And while that is a valid criticism, I think it makes the game more like a western epic, and it keeps the focus on John and his journey. All throughout New Austin, there are plenty of random encounters and side missions.
What's mine is yours.
That's very kind of you, sir.
Horseshoes, poker, blackjack, liar's dice, some of which I wish would have returned in the prequel. There's also outfits that you have to do certain tasks to unlock, challenges that take you to different places around the map, and treasure hunts that make you more familiar with the game's territory while rewarding you. It's not a role-playing game, but for a game of its kind, it's very exploration and world-focused. It nailed an aspect that other games like LA Noire fail at. LA Noire has a vast and detailed map, very accurate to the 40s too. Team Bondi went to great lengths to create that map, but in so left little to no incentive to explore or immerse yourself in the world. More than a city, it felt like a scale model, and for as much as I love LA Noire, it is one of those things that held it back. RDR1 doesn't have that problem. There's plenty to do at any given time, even something as unrestricted as hunting animals or picking flowers or causing buffalo to go extinct, you name it. Alright, if you've been paying attention, you'll know there's a very important part of this game that I haven't even mentioned. Nuevo Paraíso. It always excites me when I see Latin American countries in video games. I remember I felt the same way when I saw my home country Panama briefly appear in Uncharted 4.
But you're in Panama, right?
And hey, maybe I haven't played enough games, but I think Nuevo Paraíso is the best use of a Latin American country in a video game ever. When you first arrive, it seemingly looks just like New Austin. You know, your standard desert. But as you continue to venture upon it, it's an entirely different place. They made like 2 biomes in one biome, or I don't know. But going into Mexico with Jose Gonzalez's Far Away in the background, it was one of my gaming canon events. I mean, the sand is different, it becomes orange and white, the vegetation, the animal life, everything changes. There's spawns now, for Christ's sake. They look like geographically different regions. Another thing I love is how rudimentary everything seems compared to New Austin and Blackwater. Stores are no longer in buildings but rather in wooden stands, and the few that are in buildings don't have the same architecture as those in New Austin, much less Blackwater. It has the perfect amount of detail to excite you to explore this part of the map, despite the fact that it is still, in fact, a bunch of desert. You know, I firmly believe you can be standing in the middle of nowhere and still know if you're in Mexico or New Austin, just by looking at the little details. Not to mention, the soundtrack changes. It implements more trumpets, tambourines, and castañuelas. It keeps the spaghetti western tone the music in New Austin had, but makes it more akin to the Mexican setting. Another awesome thing is region-specific animals. The jaguar, for instance, can only be found in Ojo del Diablo. This, believe it or not, affects the price of animals. Bears, for example, which are specific to West Elizabeth, can be sold for twice as much in Mexico. These small details are what give the world its identity. When it comes to this game's ambience, this is it for me. True to the genre, but so unique and refreshing. I don't know, man. So good. After wrapping things up in Mexico, we head back to Blackwater. The western soundtrack, the yellows, the oranges, they're all gone. They were instead replaced with metallic and strange sounding melodies. Very different to what we'd gotten before. It's like a cold bucket of water. Fun's over and so is the Wild West. It's perfect. This area shouldn't feel like the West. It should be cold, like the snow and tall trees. We now have access to tailors, hotels, high-stakes gambling, and government offices. Here, we don't talk to townsfolk or funny country people. We meddle in politics and blackmail. It's a different reality that the game conveys in every way possible. So much that the quest to find Dutch isn't a cowboy epic like it was with Javier and Bill. It's a government mission. And I love seeing the duality of John fighting with the rebels against the Mexican government and then having to fight with his own government against the natives. It's as if the new world is taking John's journey from him, forcing him to the opposite end of where he would be if he had a choice. After Dutch's death, we get another highlight horse ride with Jamie Little's compass in the background, as John rushes back to, unbeknownst to him, spend his last days with his family and die, along with the Wild West. The main theme of the game brings together the musical elements of the atmosphere and merges them with the story all in one track. It starts with strings and drums, as did our journey in New Austin. It changes to trumpets and castanets when passing through Mexico. Turns into a modern guitar riff during his work with Ross in the government, and finally, combines all these parts for his final stand and death in Beecher's Hope.
Arthur, get the hell out of here and be a goddamn man.
The epilogue continues the game's story, puts an end to it, really, and it pulls off one last feat in building this world: emptiness. If you want to finish any of John's missions as Jack, you'll be reminded that you're not playing as him anymore. You're Jack Marston. There's no mission to get your family back, there's no brother to protect, a war lurking in the background, and little more is what he has left. Despite not being as fleshed out as the one in the prequel, this small epilogue is all we need to understand that the world we got to experience through John and through Arthur is over. The Red Dead Redemption duology is some of the best gaming has to offer. I don't think one is better than two, but as a Western, it knocks it out of the park. Maybe I'm biased because of how much I enjoyed it despite having played the second one first, or how well it holds up 14 years later, or all the intricacies and attention to detail in its world, ambience, and storytelling. If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate if you liked it, subscribed to the channel, and left a comment letting me know your thoughts. What other elements elevate the game for you, and what other topics would you like me to cover next? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in Angola.